Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Shaykhna.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We're here now for our 7th episode of Back to Basics. In this episode, I wanted to go back on your statements about the whole paradigm shift and understanding a new way of thinking and a new way of representing our aqidah, or even understanding our aqidah. I wanted to discuss about the notion of our aqidah. Is it just a list of creedal beliefs, or is it something that is holistic and can be applied to the worldview, and can it be applied to any society and any community around the world?
Well, the whole fact we need to look at what our aqidah is, and it being holistic or not so holistic is evidence that certain societies will view things in different ways. And what I mean by that is, if I were in a certain country where the dominant worldview is my own, I don't think this would be so much of a problem. That's not to say that the way it's being taught is necessarily ideal, but nonetheless, I don't think it would be so much of a problem. I think I would realize that, look, the majority of my society follows this worldview. I don't like the way it's being taught, but nonetheless, you would still have that holistic grasp of what the worldview is, but by the fact that by default of society adopting many of the traits of that worldview. Now, of course, that would lead us into a separate discussion as well as to whether or not every primarily Shi'i or Imami society has an Imami worldview. And sometimes when you've been under an oppressor for so long, the oppressed would adopt the qualities of that oppressor, which is why in the Middle East you tend to find that people that have been liberated from dictators tend to turn into dictators immediately after taking over. Or, for example, in the occupied Palestine, the current occupier tends to adopt the traits of the same fascists who put them into, unfortunately, oppression and concentration camps before the occupation of Palestine. Nonetheless, I don't want to diverge too greatly. What would be some of the things we could discuss here? Number one, is our aqidah being taught holistically? And I don't think it is, particularly according to where we are in the West. I don't think we are being taught this aqidah holistically. We talked several episodes back about liberalism being a new paradigm and aqidah for many Muslims here in the West. And so if I'm to be honest with you, I do think that many of the people in the West, they just follow liberalism as their aqidah. Yes, they might believe in 124,000 prophets. They might believe in a God who they call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They might even worship him. But those are just extra beliefs which they add to an already existing aqidah of liberalism. And I think this is the great danger that they suffer from.
How can we overcome this? How can we change the way that aqidah is taught in the West?
Well, we talked about in the previous episode that the first step of religion is cognitive awareness, or ma'rifah. I think that the way we can overcome this is to have a ma'rifah of a problem. You see, a large issue that plagues us all is a society which is plagued by an issue can only ever recover from that issue if it recognizes the issue in the first place. And unfortunately, I have a tendency to find that within our community, what we do is we like to shy away, and we like to pretend that everything's casual and calm, and we'll make claims like, oh, in this society we're allowed to run our own schools, we're allowed to have our own centers. Well, what's the benefit when, unfortunately, what's being promoted is just a form of liberalism with Shia trimmings and with Islamic trimmings? It's not really teaching your children the correct aqidah. And that's why today we live in an era where every single group has a minbar, every single group has a voice, and particularly in the days of the internet, we're essentially a global village. And when your kids have been raised upon discrete liberalism, what do you expect them to become other than liberals. I mean, there might be a couple generations which choose to maintain the practices of Islamic marriage and what have you. But if this is already the first generation and we've been diluted this much, what can we expect from the second or third generation?
What are the issues in particular about being a liberal? Because I understand there's different extents to being a liberal,
Yeah,
and we're not talking about hardcore liberals here, but maybe more of the like neoliberals that have emerged recently. Is there an issue with being a liberal Muslim, for example?
I do believe that one of the major issues that arises from being a liberal Muslim is a tacit approval. And I want to make very clear here so that nobody misunderstands me whatsoever, so that this cannot be taken out of context. I advocate following the laws of the country that you live in. I advocate respecting the laws of the country that you live in, because this is what the Maraji tell us to do. When you migrate to another country, you must obey the laws of the land that you're in. However, that doesn't mean that you must obey the philosophy behind those laws. Now, the main issue of liberalism is its belief in the autonomy of the human individual. Liberalism's main aqidah is that the human being has been born free and chooses to do whatever he wants, and that this is his intrinsic right. Now, of course, one wants to talk about where this aqidah comes from. It's a bastardization or a perversion of the Christian concept of Imago Dei, that people were created upon the image of God, which Western society used to believe, and therefore they have a right. But Islam does not recognize that this is the purpose of a human being. Islam does not recognize that human beings have that right. We believe that the only one that really has a right in any of this is God, and we believe in the system of ubudiyyah. Now, does that mean that we don't allow people to make that choice? Of course, we allow people to make that choice. But what we don't want to be embedded within the minds of our youth is that people are free and have those rights from an objective bird's eye perspective of God, if you understand what I'm saying.
I still struggle to get the concept, because in my mind is we are free human beings. We are God has given us the freedom whether we choose to believe in our religion or not choose to believe in the religion, as you can refer back to the ayah la ikraha fid din.
Yes.
There's no compulsion. You can choose
Of course.
to live your life however you choose, as long as you don't obviously bring harm to others.
Yes.
The whole idea of positive and negative freedoms.
Right. So this would fall under what we call personal, public and private freedoms. So for example, if I actually genuinely convince myself that it's actually my right and other people's rights to live in whatever way they want possible, what I'll start doing is justifying within the Muslim community certain controversial practices which have plagued the non-Muslim community. And I'll start phrasing it as in, why judge him? It's his right. Now, of course, we don't judge individuals, but we judge certain behaviors, we judge certain actions as being perverted. And this new aqidah of liberalism is just one that goes against the Quran, because according to the Quran, we all took a pact from God in which we acknowledged that we would come to this earth and worship Him. Now, do we allow people not to worship Him? Do we allow people to commit sins? Of course we do, because they'll be judged by God ultimately. But what we don't allow is stating that that is their right, which I think that liberalism grants them.
But then, the way I see it now, living in this society, in a liberal society, Aqidah won't have a leg to stand on at all, our Aqidah at all. If you wanted to go and preach this religion to the layman on the streets, with these liberal ideas embedded in them already, our Aqidah doesn't stand a chance, does it?
It stands a chance for those who are convinced by it, and I believe firmly that truth overcomes falsehoods. I believe that people need to want to see the truth, but at the end of the day, again, alhamdulillah, this is a blessing of a liberal society. I'm not imposing my aqidah upon anyone else. I'm merely advocating that we as Muslims be familiar with our own aqidah.
And how do you see society evolving over time? Say this aqidah was to become popularized and successful in this society, how would it shape our society the way it is at the moment?
Well, I think what it would do is it would certainly allow a lot more speakers to stop making weird claims in the name of Islam. So, you see, I don't mind the way that politicians live their lives. I don't mind the way that people live their lives. Obviously, we try to call them away from it, but whatever the society dictates, we do live in a democracy, the majority shall have their say. What I'm advocating is, that's fine. Let your society live the way it wants. Let's just not bring this into the centers where we start claiming that this is the way we should allow things to be. Let's recognize that the dominant worldview of liberal society is not the dominant worldview that was espoused by the Imams. If that makes any sense to you.
No, it does, absolutely. Absolutely it does. But then people can turn around and say, well, my aqidah is my personal beliefs. Something that is private to myself. The way I am in public has nothing to do with my aqidah. It's
well, that's not a worldview then, is it? That's just a set of creedal beliefs that they choose to hold. I mean, would they choose to shake hands with the opposite gender in public as well? Would they feel free to go to places of disrepute according to the Sharia in public as well? These are all questions that we need to ask. Now, there are, of course, some people that do choose to live that way, and I'm not sitting on TV here judging them. Each person has a story, and I don't really know why they choose to do something. But them choosing to do it aside, what we're trying to say here is that human beings are free. They will do what they want to do. Just don't do so and believe it is fine and allowed by Islam. And I believe that the very attitude that you described is a natural consequence of the aqeedah of liberalism, that look, in public, I'm just like everyone else. Let me go to that work dinner, which requires me to have alcohol on the table and what have you.
I understand. But is that worldview necessary to be a successful Muslim in your eyes?
Which worldview?
The worldview whereby your beliefs aren't just creedal and private beliefs. They're actually things you should exercise
I
in
disagree.
public.
I think that when they are just creedal, that means that it's not even a worldview anymore, because the worldview I describe is where your beliefs would actually have an impact upon your behavior. Now, in a world where your beliefs are just creedal and they literally play no role whatsoever in your public life, that's not worldview anymore.
But is that necessary to? Because my understanding of aqidah is, for example, the usul ad-din, the belief in God, the prophets, the imams.
Yeah.
Does that have to reflect in your actions, or is that something that you can keep within yourself?
I think it does. I mean, I think if I were to talk about, so a few episodes back we talked about ubudiyya. Now, if I'm to say that I believe that there's no God worthy of worship other than Allah Azza wa Jal, and yet I'm basically not following any of Allah's commands, and I'm worshipping pretty much everything around me in life, be it the social system, be it my work colleagues, be it my non-Muslim friends, be it what, for those who are in illegitimate relationships, what my illegitimate partner wants me to do, then that's not really servitude towards God now, is it? That's servitude towards the world and an abandonment of worship of God. So that's an area where an asl of deen has basically been rendered useless. Now, if you say that I believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, and yet you act in exactly the same way as those who persecuted him and drove him out of the city of Mecca acted, then again, I don't know how you would juggle these two beliefs together. It would seem like a form of cognitive dissonance to me.
But in reality, it's not that extreme. Like, for example, I might go out with a group of colleagues after work.
Yes.
And they might decide, oh, we're going down to the local pub, for example.
Right.
Me attending that gathering in the eyes of Islam is a sin.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
But in the eyes, in my view,
yes.
I'm not speaking personally, but someone who would, in my view, going to that place is I'm not doing any harm to anyone. I'm not doing any harm to myself.
Yes.
as far as I'm aware.
Yes.
Why is that taken as you stepping outside of the realms of the Aqidah? Why is that taken as you committing a sin?
Right, okay. See, this is a very complex discussion. And one thing we need to distinguish here is, have you been convinced that something's part of Islam? So let me give you an example. The average Muslim who does go to a pub, that is, well, I don't want to say the average Muslim, astaghfirullah, I'm making so many generalizations today. And that's a really bad thing, and I really ought to give myself a tap on the wrist for doing that. But many of my Muslim friends who I've known to be a bit more liberal on these things in the past, I've spoken to them, and I've always asked, listen, do you believe that the religion does not allow you to go to such places? And they'll say to me, yes, clear-cut, I don't. I don't believe that the religion allows me to. And so that's why do you go? We need to distinguish between a person that's not convinced that the religion actually tells him to do that and says that, well, these scholars might just be getting it wrong and maybe I've got it right. Such a person that, he needs to just be convinced that what he's saying is wrong.
Yeah.
But such a person who actually says that, yeah, no, I believe that Allah has actually said that you shouldn't go to such places and I go anyway. Of course, that's just a person that's undermining his aqidah and demonstrating that he doesn't actually believe in a worldview, because he doesn't even regret it afterwards. He's just, yeah.
But can you be successful in a liberal society whilst holding firm to this worldview and applying this aqidah to your life?
That remains to be seen. That remains to be seen. Remains to be seen how strongman liberalism is going to become in these societies. And it remains to be seen how many generations we can fruitfully cultivate who don't leave this religion.
Absolutely.
And inshallah ta'ala, I pray that we will have success in these matters.
Thank you very much, Sheikhna.
Sorry for ending on such a grim...
I lost track of time and I was going to end in a few minutes, but
no problem.
Inshallah we can carry on these discussions in the future.
Ta'ala.
Thank you very much.